Welcome to Slumbertainment. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let yourself relax. Tonight we explore the history of walls. Please like and subscribe for more restful content. Now, let's begin. Long before human civilization took shape, the natural world was already defined by divisions. The earliest walls were not built by human hands, but shaped by the forces of the earth itself. Cliff faces, canyons, and the dense trunks of trees formed barriers that divided light from shadow, dry land from marsh, safety from exposure. These boundaries were not designed but discovered. For early humans, they offered both protection and constraint, a pattern that would define every wall built thereafter. To understand walls is to understand how humans learned to turn the natural world's divisions into deliberate constructions, how the instinct to mark, defend, and define became a foundation of human thought as much as architecture. The earliest known human shelters were not yet walls in the architectural sense, but served the same purpose. Around 2 million years ago, Homo habilis and later Homo erectus began arranging stones and branches into windbreaks. Archaeological sites in Olduvai Gorge reveal semicircular arrangements of stones suggesting a rudimentary attempt to create enclosure. These early forms of shelter reflected a profound step, the recognition that space could be controlled. A wall, even one made of rough stone or piled brush, altered the relationship between human and environment. It was an act of choice, the separation of inside from outside. By the time of Homo sapiens, the concept of walls had expanded into both practical and symbolic realms. Caves became living spaces not only for their protection from predators and weather, but also for the way their stone boundaries enclosed light and sound. Inside, humans painted animals, handprints and patterns, marking their interior world as distinct from the vast, unpredictable wilderness beyond. In this sense, the wall became the first human canvas, a surface on which to project meaning. To enclose space was to claim it, and to mark it was to understand it. As humans began to build beyond natural formations, the first constructed walls appeared. The earliest known examples, found in Jericho and dating back to around 8000 BCE, were stone structures several meters thick, encircling what may have been one of the world's first true cities. Their function is still debated. Some archaeologists suggest defense against human enemies. Others propose flood protection from nearby rivers. Whatever their purpose, they represented a monumental shift. Walls not as temporary shelters, but as enduring communal boundaries. Where earlier walls protected individuals, these fortified entire populations. They created the idea of within and without on a societal scale. From this point onward, the story of walls mirrors the story of civilization itself. Every settlement that grew into a city relied on walls for structure and identity. The physical act of building with stone and clay became intertwined with abstract notions of belonging and exclusion. A walled city was more than a cluster of dwellings. It was a declaration of order in a chaotic landscape. Inside the wall lay security, law, and shared culture. Outside lay the unknown. Yet even as walls protected, they also isolated. The same structures that gave rise to community also defined the limits of who was considered part of it. The materials of these early walls reflected the environments in which they were built. In Mesopotamia, where stone was scarce, people shaped sun-dried mud into bricks, stacking them into thick, tapered forms that absorbed the desert heat by day and released it at night. In regions of abundant stone, builders selected rounded river rocks or quarried limestone, creating rough but enduring defences. Each wall carried within it the geology of its surroundings. a literal shaping of earth into culture. The rhythm of bricklaying or stone setting became a kind of physical language, one that spoke of adaptation and survival. Over time, these early techniques evolved into traditions passed down through generations. Walls became smoother, straighter, and more deliberate. Mortar, a simple mixture of clay, lime, or ash, allowed builders to join stones securely, making walls taller and more stable. With each improvement came new possibilities. Human societies began to think vertically as well as horizontally, stacking their knowledge layer by layer like courses of brick. The wall was no longer just a barrier. It became the essential framework for all permanent architecture. Yet the impulse behind these creations remained the same: to control space, to create a defined interior. Even today, that instinct shapes how people experience comfort and safety. The sense of being enclosed, of knowing where one's boundaries lie, is both psychological and architectural. It is no coincidence that many early myths describe creation as an act of separation: light from darkness, earth from water, sky from land. In this way, the human-made wall echoes something fundamental in nature's own order. In reflecting on those first walls, one can imagine the quiet satisfaction of early builders as they stood back from their work. A ring of stones or clay, perhaps crude but enduring. It was a visible sign of mastery over the environment, a testament to foresight and patience. They could rest behind it, sleep within it, and wake knowing that their world had a perimeter. This small practical act would evolve into temples, cities, and empires. But at its heart, the wall remained a simple expression of a universal need: to create a place where life could unfold in safety, shape, and meaning. When humans began to settle permanently, walls became more than mere boundaries. They became instruments of engineering. The transition from nomadic shelters to permanent dwellings marked the beginning of architecture. Around 10,000 BCE, as agriculture took hold in the Fertile Crescent, humans began shaping the materials beneath their feet into lasting forms. Earth, stone, and water combined to produce the first building blocks of civilization. From these, walls rose in straight lines and deliberate angles, announcing a new mastery over both environment and time. The earliest mud brick structures, found at sites such as Çatalhöyük in present-day Turkey, reveal a remarkable sophistication. Each home was a compact cell in a greater urban fabric, entered through a roof hatch rather than a door. The walls, built from hand-shaped mud bricks mixed with straw, formed continuous surfaces, strong yet pliant, easily repaired after seasonal wear. These walls were not defensive, but domestic, serving to define family units and preserve warmth through the night. Within their compact enclosures, people stored grain, prepared food, and slept in safety. Archaeologists have found evidence of wall plasters renewed year after year, suggesting not only maintenance, but ritual, an annual reaffirmation of the structure's role as protector. As techniques evolved, the wall began to express hierarchy. In early Mesopotamian cities such as Uruk and Eridu, differences in wall thickness, finish, and ornament distinguished temples from homes. The ziggurats, massive stepped platforms of baked brick, represented the first monumental use of walls as visual symbols of power. Layer upon layer of masonry rose toward the sky, each brick sun-dried or kiln-fired to endure the heat of centuries. These structures did not merely divide space, they embodied cosmology. To ascend the ziggurat's terraces was to move closer to the divine. In Egypt, stone replaced mud brick as the dominant medium for expressing permanence. Along the Nile, the abundance of limestone and sandstone enabled the creation of structures that defied erosion and time. The walls of temples and tombs became canvases for a visual language carved into their surfaces. Hieroglyphs, figures, and measured reliefs turned stone into text. Every inch of wall served a communicative function, recording prayers, laws, and cosmic order. To walk along these corridors of stone was to move through encoded meaning, each panel a message from rulers to eternity. Stone walls also introduced a new concept: precision. The Great Pyramids at Giza are constructed from blocks weighing several tons each, aligned with astonishing accuracy. The joints between them are so fine that a blade cannot pass through. Such mastery required more than brute labour. It demanded geometry, measurement, and organisation. In these early monuments, architecture and science converged. The act of wall building became a process of abstract reasoning, where each stone was a unit in a larger equation of weight, pressure, and alignment. Elsewhere, civilizations adapted walls to local conditions. In the Indus Valley, brick cities such as Mohenjo-Daro displayed remarkable urban planning. Their walls were modular, built with standardized bricks that fit a consistent ratio of length to width to height. This uniformity hints at early administrative control and a shared understanding of material efficiency. The walls of these homes also featured drains and bathing areas, proof that engineering had entered daily life. To live within walls was to live within systems, an early form of civic order. Across continents in the Andes, builders shaped massive stone walls that followed the contours of the mountains themselves. At Sacsayhuaman, the Inca achieved extraordinary precision without mortar, fitting stones with curved edges so perfectly that centuries of earthquakes have not shifted them. These walls were both structural and symbolic, merging human intention with the natural forms of rock. They demonstrate that even in isolation, civilizations arrived at the same insight, that to control stone was to control permanence. Yet walls were not only about endurance. Clay, less durable but more versatile, became the medium of experimentation. In ancient China, the earliest rammed earth walls were compacted between wooden forms using layers of soil, gravel, and straw. This method produced dense, resilient barriers that resisted fire and weather. The Great Wall, in its earliest iterations, began as such structures, earth pressed into form, extending across the northern plains. The technique spread widely because it required no quarrying, only patience and rhythm. Each strike of the ramming pole compressed the earth's particles into coherence, an audible pulse of construction echoing across centuries. The science of walls was becoming inseparable from the science of materials. Builders learned that clay's shrinkage upon drying could be reduced with straw, that stone's weight could be countered by geometry, that heat transformed earth into ceramic strength. The first kilns emerged not for art, but for walls. Firing bricks to a consistent hardness created the possibility of true urban scale. Where sun-dried bricks yielded to rain, baked bricks endured. This single shift extended the lifespan of structures from decades to centuries. Within these walls, the texture of human life changed. Sound, temperature, and light became controllable. The wall absorbed heat by day and released it at night, creating a stable interior climate. It muffled the chaos of the outside world, defining the auditory boundary of home. Even in its simplest form, a wall redefined sensory experience. It allowed privacy, reflection, and rest. Civilization's growth depended on these qualities as much as on food or water. The rise of permanent architecture was not a sudden event, but an accumulation of small discoveries. Over thousands of years, each technique, mud brick, stone cutting, mortar mixing, added precision and endurance to human structures. The wall became both a record and a promise, preserving traces of hands that shaped it and ideas that guided them. With every improvement, the boundary between human intention and natural matter grew clearer. A wall was no longer just earth or stone. It was thought made visible. As early societies matured into kingdoms and empires, the wall became a declaration of power. What began as a tool for shelter transformed into an instrument of defense and control. Fortifications rose not only to protect, but to project authority, to mark territory and embody the strength of those within. From mud brick ramparts in Mesopotamia to stone citadels in Greece and Central Asia, each generation built higher, thicker, and more complex barriers. The story of fortified walls is the story of human conflict and cooperation, of the tension between security and ambition. The first fortified cities emerged as agriculture made wealth visible and vulnerable. Jericho's ancient stone wall, once thought defensive, may have begun as flood protection, but later examples across Sumer show clear military intent. By 4000 BCE, Uruk's walls stretched nearly 10 kilometers, enclosing thousands of inhabitants. Constructed from millions of clay bricks, they represented a feat of collective labor, a visible contract between ruler and ruled. The wall promised safety in exchange for loyalty. Its scale turned architecture into politics. Defense depended on both height and understanding of human movement. Early builders learned that flat vertical walls were easily scaled, so they began sloping them outward, creating battering resistance and deflection against siege engines. Towers punctuated the perimeter, offering vantage points for archers and sentinels. Gates became the most critical components, blending engineering and ceremony. The main entrance to Babylon, the Ishtar Gate, exemplified this dual role. Its glazed blue bricks, adorned with lions and dragons, were as symbolic as they were functional. Anyone passing beneath its arch confronted both beauty and authority, an architecture of awe designed to deter aggression as much as to repel it. In the Mediterranean, stone fortifications took on new complexity. Mycenaean citadels, built in the 2nd millennium BCE, used massive limestone blocks fitted without mortar, forming walls so thick they were later called Cyclopean, as if only giants could have raised them. The precision of their construction made them nearly indestructible. The wall of Tiryns still stands, each block bearing the marks of hand tools used more than 3,000 years ago. Inside these enclosures, hierarchy found physical expression. Outer walls for defense, inner courtyards for the elite, and layered thresholds separating ruler from ruled. As metallurgy advanced, so too did the methods of siege. Bronze and later iron tools made breaching walls feasible. Engineers responded with new defensive geometries, angled bastions, double walls, and moats. In Mesopotamia and Egypt, cities began using walls not only for protection, but also to control trade and taxation. Gates became checkpoints, places of measurement and negotiation. A wall could keep enemies out, but it could also regulate the flow of goods, people, and information. Power concentrated wherever stone met passageway. China's early defensive walls show this evolution on a continental scale. During the Warring States period, from the 5th to 3rd centuries BCE, rival kingdoms built long linear fortifications across deserts and hills. Each was local in origin, but their alignment hinted at an emerging sense of unified defense. When the Qin dynasty consolidated China in 221 BCE, Emperor Qin Shi Huang ordered these disparate structures joined, forming the first version of what would become the Great Wall. Built primarily of tamped earth and later reinforced with stone and brick, it stretched for thousands of kilometers. Though not a single continuous wall, its psychological effect was immense. It defined the edge of empire and the extent of imperial will. The wall's military function had a secondary consequence. It organised human labour on a massive scale. To build such fortifications required coordination, planning, and sustained effort from thousands of workers. The logistics of food, tools, and materials demanded systems of record-keeping and management that anticipated later bureaucracies. In this sense, every great wall was also a school of governance. Its very existence reflected not just fear of invasion, but capacity for cooperation. In Europe, city walls evolved alongside the rise of classical and medieval polities. The Romans standardized fortification through their camps and colonies. Each castrum followed a grid, its perimeter marked by strong stone or timber walls with evenly spaced towers. This model spread across the empire, from Britain to North Africa, embedding the wall as a symbol of Roman order. The remains of Hadrian's Wall in northern England illustrate the dual nature of these constructions: defence against northern tribes and assertion of imperial geography. The wall was less about keeping barbarians out than about defining where Rome ended. As centuries passed, new technologies shifted the balance between attacker and defender. The invention of gunpowder in China and its spread to the west rendered high, thin walls vulnerable. Builders adapted with lower, thicker fortifications angled to deflect cannon fire. The medieval castle, with its concentric defences and moat, represented the peak of pre-modern wall design. Yet even at this height of military architecture, the principle remained the same: containment as power. To hold territory was to enclose it, to trace one's influence in stone. These walls also shaped societies psychologically. Living within defended perimeters created a collective identity, distinct from those beyond. The inhabitants of walled cities saw themselves as civilized, ordered, and protected. Those outside were perceived as nomads or threats. The physical structure reinforced social separation. Over time, even when external threats faded, cities continued to maintain their walls out of tradition and pride. The wall, once military necessity, became civic emblem. By the late medieval period, as trade and diplomacy reduced constant warfare, many city walls turned symbolic. Gates were rebuilt as triumphal arches, their purpose shifting from defence to display. The function of the wall had evolved again, from barrier to monument. Its stones still stood, but their meaning had changed. What began as protection had become representation. As human societies grew more complex, walls began to serve not only physical but spiritual purposes. They enclosed sanctuaries, defined sacred ground, and shaped the rituals of worship. The wall, once a tool of defence, became a threshold between the human and the divine. Across continents, civilizations expressed their cosmology through the construction of enclosed spaces. Temples, shrines, and monasteries all relied on walls to separate the holy from the ordinary, turning architecture into theology. In ancient Egypt, temple complexes such as Karnak and Luxor reveal this sacred geometry in its most refined form. High sandstone walls surrounded vast courtyards and hidden sanctuaries, each level of access restricted to specific ranks of priests. To approach the inner chamber was to move progressively from light to shadow, from sound to silence. The wall's massiveness served both symbolic and practical roles. They excluded chaos from the ordered realm of the gods and insulated the rituals within from the noise of daily life. Hieroglyphs carved into every surface recorded prayers and offerings, transforming walls into archives of devotion. The temple wall was both boundary and book. In Mesopotamia and Persia, similar principles took form through different materials. Ziggurats and fire temples stood on raised platforms encircled by walls that oriented the worshipper upward and inward. In the Persian Empire, the sacred complex at Persepolis combined ceremonial processions with architectural order. Its retaining walls and terraces created a controlled ascent toward the royal throne room, merging divine representation with imperial power. The wall's vertical and horizontal lines guided movement, reinforcing hierarchy through spatial design. In the Greco-Roman world, religion and public life interwove through walled sanctuaries called temenos. These enclosures defined sacred precincts without complete separation from the city beyond. The Parthenon's walls, for example, framed the statue of Athena, but also served as backdrop for festivals visible to the populace. The boundary was conceptual rather than impenetrable. It marked reverence rather than exclusion. This balance between openness and control became a defining feature of classical religious architecture and influenced later sacred spaces from Byzantium to the Renaissance. In the Near East, a different kind of wall acquired deep symbolic significance: the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Originally part of a vast retaining structure for the Second Temple, it survived the Roman destruction of 70 CE and became a site of remembrance and prayer. Over centuries, it evolved from architectural remnant to spiritual focus. The stones themselves absorbed the devotion of millions, worn smooth by touch and time. Here, the wall ceased to be boundary and became conduit, a vertical link between earth and heaven. Its endurance demonstrates how material structures can transcend their original function and become vessels of collective memory. In other cultures, walls defined sacred isolation rather than collective ritual. Buddhist monasteries, from the rock-cut caves of Ajanta in India to the walled courtyards of Tibet and China, used enclosure to support meditation and learning. The cloistered wall separated contemplation from distraction, forming an architectural expression of inward focus. Monks walked its perimeters in silence, tracing the limits of worldly attachment. The pattern would echo later in Christian monastic traditions across Europe, where stone walls encircled abbeys and gardens, creating microcosms of discipline and devotion. Within these perimeters, time slowed, sound softened, and thought deepened. Medieval Europe perfected the fusion of structure and symbolism through its cathedrals. Their soaring walls, buttressed by intricate stone ribs, lifted immense weight skyward while dissolving it into light through stained glass. The wall evolved into both frame and filter. In places like Chartres or Notre Dame, light refracted into colour across stone vaults, transforming solid matter into an atmosphere of faith. The thickness of walls, once necessary for defence, was here transformed into an instrument of transcendence. Masonry became metaphor, the material striving toward the immaterial. Across Asia, sacred walls served not to enclose, but to guide. The stupas of Sri Lanka and Nepal, ringed by low circular walls, invited circumambulation. Worshippers walked clockwise around them, tracing the path of the sun. The act of moving along a wall became meditation in motion, reinforcing cosmic order through repetition. In China and Japan, temple compounds extended this idea into spatial harmony. Wooden walls divided pavilions and gardens with an intentional rhythm of separation and connection. The void between walls was as meaningful as the walls themselves, expressing a philosophy of balance rather than dominance. Even in pre-Columbian America, walls reflected spiritual geometry. The Maya and Inca built sacred enclosures aligned with celestial events. At Machu Picchu, walls of finely cut granite follow astronomical lines, marking solstices and equinoxes with precision. The stones fit seamlessly, as though the builders sought to erase the distinction between human and natural order. The sacred wall here was not imposition upon the earth, but continuation of it. a visible dialogue between geology and belief. Throughout these traditions, one truth remained constant: walls mediated the boundary between seen and unseen. Whether towering in Egypt, carved into Himalayan cliffs, or whispering beneath jungle vines, they defined how humans approached mystery. The wall provided containment for what could not otherwise be grasped. It shaped worship not through its surface, but through its restraint. As faith systems diversified, the meaning of sacred walls expanded into memory itself. They became places of pilgrimage and reflection, holding emotional weight beyond their structure. The Berlin Wall's later transformation into a memorial, or the Wailing Wall's enduring role as a site of lamentation, shows how humanity continues to invest walls with reverence. A wall can hold history just as it once held gods. In both cases, its strength lies not only in material endurance, but in the collective intention that surrounds it. As empires expanded, walls became instruments of administration as much as defense. They marked not only the outer limits of power, but also the lines that structured its interior. A wall could define a city, a province, or a border. It could signal belonging or exclusion. In imperial systems, from Rome and China to Persia and Byzantium, walls were the physical syntax of governance. They translated the abstract idea of empire into stone, earth, and brick. In Rome, fortification was both practical and ideological. The empire's borders stretched across deserts, forests, and rivers, each frontier defined by a linear structure known as a limes. Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, built in the 2nd century CE, remains the clearest expression of this policy. 80 Roman miles long, it consisted of stone walls, ditches, and fortlets spaced at regular intervals. Its function was less to repel invasion than to control movement, trade, and taxation. Soldiers patrolled its length, inspecting passes and monitoring exchanges. The wall thus embodied Roman law as much as Roman strength, a bureaucratic instrument in masonry form. Farther east, the Sasanian Empire of Persia developed similar systems. The Gorgan Wall, sometimes called the Red Snake, stretched over 190 kilometers along the Caspian Plain. Constructed from fired brick and reinforced with watchtowers and canals, it formed one of the most extensive fortifications of the ancient world. Archaeological evidence shows a high degree of planning. Water channels ran parallel to supply both troops and agriculture, linking military and civilian economies. The Sasanian wall network demonstrates how empires integrated architecture into ecological and administrative systems. A wall did not simply stand against enemies, it organized landscapes into zones of purpose. China extended this principle to continental scale. After the Qin and Han dynasties unified earlier fortifications, the Great Wall became an evolving infrastructure rather than a single monument. Each dynasty maintained, rebuilt, or extended it according to new threats and resources. Stone, tamped earth, and brick formed a composite structure crossing mountain ridges, valleys, and deserts. Signal towers communicated through smoke by day and fire by night, transforming the wall into a communication network. It functioned as border, highway, and message system in one continuous system of control. The Great Wall's endurance lies not in its uninterrupted length. Most of it was rebuilt many times, but in its idea, a visible, organized limit to chaos. In the Mediterranean, Byzantine builders adapted older Roman fortifications into layered defences. Constantinople's Theodosian walls, completed in the 5th century CE, remain among the most effective in history. Triple tiers of stone and brick, flanked by moats and towers, protected the city for nearly 1,000 years. Their design balanced strength and redundancy. If an outer wall fell, defenders retreated behind another. This approach reflected an imperial mindset shaped by resilience. The city's survival through centuries of siege turned its walls into symbols of divine favour and human ingenuity. When they finally fell to Ottoman artillery in 1453, it marked not just a military defeat, but the end of an architectural era. Elsewhere, walls took on a ceremonial dimension as empires sought to express their scale. In ancient India, cities like Kumbhalgarh were surrounded by massive stone walls that ran for tens of kilometres across rugged terrain. These boundaries served both defence and declaration, demonstrating the ruler's reach and resources. Similar patterns appeared in Angkor, where moats and walls framed temple complexes as microcosms of the universe. Each layer represented a cosmological principle: earth, water, and heaven rendered in architecture. The empire's spatial imagination was built into its walls. Trade routes reinforced the strategic value of fortification. Along the Silk Road, caravanserais, walled rest stations, provided security for merchants and travellers. Their thick, windowless walls enclosed courtyards with stables, lodgings, and storage. Beyond simple protection, they created predictable nodes of exchange, connecting economies from the Mediterranean to East Asia. A traveller could measure the rhythm of empire in the distance between walls. The regularity of enclosure gave form to the abstract concept of continuity across thousands of kilometres. In colonial periods, the logic of the wall shifted again. European powers building overseas outposts constructed fortified ports to control access rather than territory. Coastal walls in Goa, Macau, and Havana stood as gateways of empire. Cannons replaced towers, and geometry replaced height. Engineers such as Sébastien Leprestre de Vauban in 17th century France perfected the art of angular fortification, walls designed to absorb and deflect artillery fire. The bastioned fortress became a global template, reproduced wherever imperial power sought to root itself. The political meaning of these structures was unmistakable. To enclose space was to legitimize rule. Colonial walls rarely needed to be impregnable. They only needed to symbolize permanence. Their clean lines and symmetrical layouts conveyed order, control, and civilization in contrast to what imperial rhetoric deemed chaos beyond. In this way, the wall became a statement of ideology. It was architecture as narrative, the story of authority told in stone. Yet walls of empire also revealed fragility. Maintaining long perimeters demanded constant labour and resources. Once the economic or administrative core weakened, the periphery crumbled. The Roman limes dissolved as garrisons were abandoned. The Great Wall eroded when patrols ceased. Colonial forts fell silent as trade patterns shifted. The remains of these walls, scattered across continents, trace the life cycle of power itself: expansion, consolidation, and decay. Over time, many of these structures found new meaning as cultural memory. The Great Wall became a symbol of endurance, not domination. Hadrian's Wall turned from frontier to heritage. The ramparts of Constantinople became historical monuments rather than military barriers. What was once an assertion of empire became a site of reflection on its impermanence. In every age, the wall of empire has carried a paradox. It claims to define stability, yet it records change. Built to last, it outlives the systems that justified it. Its stones stand as witnesses, silent but eloquent, marking where human ambition once traced its line across the earth. As empires faded and societies turned inward, the wall's meaning shifted from defence to dwelling. Once a statement of power, it became a vessel of privacy, comfort, and belonging. the home emerged as civilization's smallest unit of order, and its walls defined what that meant. Within them, humans organized daily life, separating work from rest, family from world, silence from noise. The domestic wall became the architecture of intimacy. Early urban homes, from Mesopotamia to Rome, used simple materials but complex logic. In dense cities, houses shared walls to conserve space and heat. The party wall, one structure serving two dwellings, was an early expression of cooperation through architecture. Archaeological remains in Pompeii show contiguous houses with painted interiors, where walls became both division and decoration. The plastered surfaces carried colour, pattern, and myth, turning separation into aesthetic experience. The wall was not merely functional, it reflected status and taste. In Roman villas, walls choreographed the progression from public to private. The atrium received guests, open and light. Beyond it, layers of walls guided movement toward the tablinum and peristyle, culminating in hidden rooms for sleep and retreat. Each threshold expressed degrees of access. Stone and plaster mapped social hierarchy onto space. The domestic wall thus mediated not only between inside and outside, but between roles, master and guest, family and servant, sacred and mundane. In East Asia, similar principles took subtler forms. Traditional Chinese courtyard houses, or siheyuan, surrounded a central open space with continuous perimeter walls. Privacy and order derived from enclosure. The outer wall concealed life within from the street, while inner partitions organized family hierarchies. Each courtyard balanced symmetry with seclusion, embodying Confucian ideals of harmony and respect. The wall here was both moral and material, a discipline of space reflecting the discipline of conduct. In Japan, architecture pursued the opposite aesthetic of impermanence. The paper and wood partitions known as shoji replaced heavy masonry with light translucence. These movable walls blurred boundaries, allowing spaces to expand or contract according to need. In contrast to Western permanence, Japanese walls emphasized temporality. Walls as suggestion rather than boundary. Their fragility encouraged mindfulness. Their transparency invited nature inside. Where stone excluded, paper mediated. Both forms revealed cultural attitudes toward control and openness. Across medieval Europe, domestic walls thickened again under the pressures of insecurity. Stone keeps and manor houses prioritized defense, merging household and fortress. Windows were narrow, rooms small, corridors winding. The wall absorbed not only structural load but emotional anxiety. To live behind it was to live within protection earned through endurance. Yet as stability returned, the wall softened. Timber framing, plaster infill, and decorative half-timbering introduced warmth and expression. By the Renaissance, walls became canvases for proportion and ornament. Their geometry reflected rediscovered ideals of balance. The scientific revolution further changed how walls were built and understood. With the rise of mechanical heating and ventilation, walls transitioned from massive thermal masses to engineered boundaries controlling light, air, and sound. In 18th century Europe, brick and plaster combined with glass, allowing illumination without exposure. The domestic wall became semi-permeable, balancing transparency with privacy. Houses no longer simply resisted weather, they modulated it. In the 19th century, industrialization transformed wall construction entirely. Mass-produced brick, cast iron, and later steel altered proportions. The load-bearing wall, once essential, began to lose primacy as internal frames carried weight. The wall evolved into a curtain rather than a core. This shift allowed new spatial freedoms. Apartments rose vertically, Windows expanded, rooms multiplied. The home's walls now expressed personal identity within collective structures. Wallpaper, paint and moulding, personalised repetition, making individuality possible in uniform buildings. Meanwhile, the concept of home extended across social classes. In rapidly growing cities, tenements and row houses replicated the logic of enclosure at scale. Thin walls divided families stacked within shared structures, offering minimal separation but maximum density. Privacy became a privilege. In contrast, suburban expansion reintroduced the detached house, each surrounded by its own perimeter of fences and hedges. The social meaning of the wall inverted again. Separation became aspiration. To have one's own walls was to have one's own world. Modernism in the 20th century challenged these assumptions. Architects like Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe sought to dissolve the traditional wall altogether. Concrete, glass and steel created open plans where structure and skin were distinct. The wall no longer confined, it framed. Transparency was equated with progress, the house with clarity and flow. Yet even in these minimalist spaces, the need for enclosure persisted. Glass may admit light, but curtains and screens reintroduced privacy. The human instinct for boundary proved unbroken. At the domestic scale, walls also became repositories of memory. Photos, shelves and art turned them into biographies of inhabitants. Each mark, nail and discoloration recorded time. The wall bore silent witness to generations: births, meals, arguments, departures. Unlike public fortifications, these were personal archives, ephemeral yet deeply felt. The domestic wall's endurance was emotional rather than structural. By the late 20th century, technology began eroding physical boundaries. Open-plan interiors and digital connectivity blurred distinctions between home and work, public and private. Yet even in virtual space, the language of walls persisted. Firewalls and passwords replaced brick and mortar, preserving the metaphor of protection. The instinct remained, to define a safe zone against intrusion. Through millennia, the domestic wall has shifted from fortress to framework, from thick stone to invisible code. Its evolution traces not just changes in material, but changes in how humans conceive safety and identity. To dwell is to draw a line around existence, to shape the space where life unfolds at human scale. Whether built of clay, timber, or glass, the walls of home continue to articulate the most fundamental architecture of all, the need to belong somewhere defined, even if only by the faintest boundary. Every wall, no matter its purpose, obeys the same physical laws. Its existence depends on the management of force, weight, and material cohesion. Behind every stone or brick lies an invisible conversation with gravity. Understanding that conversation transformed building from craft into science. From ancient masons to modern engineers, the study of how walls stand has shaped mathematics, physics, and the technological imagination. At its simplest, a wall resists compression. The downward load of its own mass, and any structure above it must be transferred safely into the ground. Early builders learned through experience that thicker bases provided stability. The tapering forms of pyramids and ziggurats embody this intuitive understanding. Their slope distributes pressure outward, reducing shear at the base. What began as instinct became principle. The greater the load, the broader the support. This relationship between geometry and stability is the foundation of all structural science. As tools and observation improved, builders quantified what had once been guesswork. The discovery of the arch around the 3rd millennium BCE turned walls from passive barriers into active components. By channeling weight laterally through a curved form, walls could support greater spans with less material. Roman aqueducts, bridges, and vaults demonstrated this mastery. The arch, dome, and vault all rely on walls that are not merely vertical, but structural participants in a system of distributed stress. Engineering emerged from such insights, transforming walls from static masses into dynamic frameworks. Material science followed. Mud, stone, and wood each behave differently under load. Stone excels in compression but fractures under tension. Wood bends without breaking but decays. Brick combines uniformity with adaptability. Mortar, a seemingly simple filler, changed everything. Lime mortar in ancient Greece and Rome allowed microscopic flexibility, enabling walls to absorb vibration and minor shifts without collapse. Later, hydraulic cement, capable of setting underwater, expanded possibilities further. The wall could now anchor bridges, harbours, and entire cities. During the Middle Ages, masons refined empirical rules into geometry. The proportions of buttresses, arches, and piers were codified through practical ratios rather than abstract theory. The Gothic cathedral exemplifies this synthesis. Flying buttresses transfer roof loads outward and downward, allowing walls to rise high and thin. The heavy mass of Romanesque masonry gave way to skeletal lightness. These were not decorative inventions but structural revelations, the wall reconceived as membrane rather than mass. Renaissance architects advanced this reasoning through measurement and analysis. Filippo Brunelleschi's Dome of Florence, built in the 15th century, relied on a double shell linked by horizontal ribs. Each brick followed a herringbone pattern to lock compression forces into equilibrium. For the first time, builders documented and modelled stresses, transforming intuition into experiment. Geometry merged with observation, marking the beginning of structural engineering. The Industrial Revolution made structure measurable. Iron and later steel reframed how walls functioned. Load-bearing masonry became inefficient compared to skeletal frames. In this new logic, walls enclosed but no longer carried weight. The term curtain wall described surfaces suspended from internal frameworks, light yet weatherproof. The 19th century warehouses of Manchester and Chicago's first steel-framed skyscrapers demonstrated this shift. The wall's role had changed fundamentally. It now defined appearance more than strength. Concrete extended this evolution. When mixed with steel reinforcement, it united compressive and tensile capacity in one material. Reinforced concrete walls could curve, cantilever, or rise to unprecedented heights. The 20th century's great architectural experiments, Le Corbusier's monolithic houses, Frank Lloyd Wright's cantilevered terraces, Louis Kahn's massive folded forms, exploited this fusion of strength and plasticity. Walls became sculptural, expressive of both mass and void. Modern computational analysis allows every force within a wall to be modelled precisely. Software simulates loads, vibrations, and thermal expansion, optimizing shape and material. Engineers can now design walls thinner, taller, and more resilient than ever before. Skyscrapers use composite walls of steel and concrete filled with insulation and sensors. These systems monitor strain and temperature in real time, transforming static structures into self-reporting organisms. The wall has become a data surface, yet physics still governs all. A wall stands or fails according to the same timeless equations of stress and strain. Whether of brick, glass, or carbon fibre, it must satisfy equilibrium. All forces balanced, all moments resolved. Even the most advanced facade depends on the same principles once understood by Bronze Age builders, stacking stones against wind. Technology refines methods, not laws. The science of walls also concerns environment. Thermal behaviour, acoustics, and moisture control define comfort as much as stability. Insulation materials, mineral wool, foam, aerogel, allow walls to moderate heat flow. Air barriers prevent condensation and decay. The physics of conduction and convection now guide thickness and layering. A well-designed wall is a living gradient of temperature and vapour, mediating between human needs and natural cycles. Sound behaves differently, but demands similar understanding. Density, elasticity, and surface texture determine how walls reflect or absorb vibration. Recording studios, libraries, and hospitals rely on engineered walls that manage silence as carefully as fortresses once managed security. The ancient desire for peace within enclosure continues, now rendered through acoustic coefficients rather than stone thickness. At the frontier, material science blurs distinctions between structure and environment. Researchers develop self-healing concrete, which uses bacteria to seal microcracks, phase change panels that store and release thermal energy, and photovoltaic cladding that turns walls into power generators. These innovations transform the wall from passive barrier into active participant in ecological systems. Despite this progress, the essence of wall building remains consistent. Every improvement, mathematical, mechanical, digital, serves the same goal: equilibrium between force and form. The wall stands because it distributes weight wisely. Its endurance depends not on strength alone, but on understanding. In that sense, every wall, ancient or modern, is a record of human reasoning inscribed in matter. As cities expanded, walls shaped not only individual buildings, but entire urban landscapes. Their function extended beyond defence to organisation, zoning, and circulation. The layout of streets, the arrangement of public spaces, and the distribution of residences all depended on the presence or absence of enclosing structures. A city without walls was more fluid, but enclosed districts allowed planners to regulate access, commerce, and sanitation. In this way, walls were instruments of both control and coherence. Ancient cities often retained defensive walls while incorporating internal partitions to manage population density. Babylon, with its double walls and internal precincts, illustrates this approach. Outer walls regulated entry, while interior walls delineated markets, temples, and homes. The urban grid itself became a series of enclosures within enclosures, each layer serving social, economic, and ritual functions. Even pedestrian movement was guided by the presence of walls, shaping patterns of interaction and hierarchy. In the classical Mediterranean, Greek and Roman cities combined fortification with public space. The agora or forum lay within walled enclosures, but remained accessible from multiple streets. Walls created edges rather than isolation, framing civic life while maintaining security. Roman town planning also emphasized practical circulation. Streets ran parallel and perpendicular, bounded by walls that marked property lines. The wall in this context was both container and coordinator, a tool to impose order upon density. During the medieval period, city walls were both defensive and symbolic. Fortified towns grew around castles or religious centres, with thick stone barriers punctuated by gates controlling access. Streets often narrowed near walls to hinder invaders and maximise surveillance. Inside, walls were less about privacy and more about delineating jurisdiction. The spatial hierarchy, market squares, guild houses, and noble residences, was reinforced by the architecture of enclosure. Walls structured society as clearly as they structured space. In Asia, walled cities followed similar logic with cultural variation. Chinese cities often employed concentric walls, where inner enclosures contained administrative or religious centres, and outer walls accommodated the general population. Imperial capitals like Chang'an exemplified this multi-layered approach, with monumental gates articulating cardinal directions and ceremonial axes. Walls mediated the flow of people, goods, and information, reinforcing political and cosmological order simultaneously. In Europe, Renaissance planners began to balance fortification with aesthetics and functionality. Star forts, developed to resist artillery, incorporated geometric projections and angled bastions. Though primarily military, these structures influenced street layouts, canal systems, and public squares. Urban walls evolved into an interplay between defence, circulation, and civic beauty. By the 18th century, many city walls had lost military relevance but remained integral to urban identity, delineating neighbourhoods and preserving social hierarchies. In modern industrial cities, walls internalised new functions. Factories, warehouses, and apartment blocks used party walls to economise space, conserve heat, and organise workflow. Industrial production depended on the efficient containment of activity. Walls separated machinery from labour, storage from circulation, and noise from living quarters. In this way, the wall became a logistical tool as much as a structural element. Public walls also mediated sensory experience. Street canyons formed by continuous building fronts create shade, wind patterns, and acoustic environments. Tall, uninterrupted facades amplify echoes, limit sunlight, and define microclimates. Urban walls influence movement and perception, shaping the daily rhythm of city life. They frame vistas, mask undesirable sights, and highlight civic landmarks. Even when not defensive, walls regulate experience. In densely populated areas, walls contribute to social stratification. Tenement blocks, gated communities, and institutional campuses all rely on physical separation to manage interaction. Access control becomes as much psychological as physical. The perception of enclosure defines belonging and exclusion. The wall mediates both movement and social identity, making boundaries tangible. Urban walls also integrate technology. Modern facades include insulation, ventilation, fireproofing, and energy generation. Smart facades monitor temperature, humidity, and structural stress. In high-rise buildings, curtain walls enclose interior volumes while transmitting light and sound, controlling climate while appearing transparent. The urban wall has become an interface between human need, technological system, and environment. City planning increasingly views walls as instruments of flow rather than mere barriers. Pedestrian zones, transit corridors, and green belts rely on strategic enclosure to guide movement. Temporary walls, fences, and modular partitions create flexible urban spaces, accommodating events, construction, and seasonal adaptation. In this sense, the city itself functions as a layered wall system, regulating interaction while allowing continuity. From ancient fortifications to contemporary urban planning, walls define the city as both machine and organism. They structure human activity, mediate experience, and reflect social values. Their presence is simultaneously practical and symbolic, providing safety, controlling movement, and asserting authority. The evolution of urban walls mirrors the evolution of cities themselves, complex, adaptive, and in perpetual negotiation between enclosure and openness. Walls exist not only to contain human activity, but to engage with the natural world. From the earliest terraces to modern retaining structures, humans have used walls to manage water, soil, and slope. The interaction between wall and environment demonstrates a profound understanding of material, gravity, and ecology. A well-designed wall mediates forces, balancing human intent with natural processes. In agricultural societies, walls served as both enclosure and cultivation tool. Terracing in the Andes, Mediterranean, and East Asia used stone walls to level slopes, retain soil, and reduce erosion. Each wall transformed the land incrementally, creating fields where none could have existed. Dry stone walls, often constructed without mortar, absorbed shifts in soil and rock, flexing with rainfall and seismic movement. The design was resilient, low maintenance, and sustainable. The wall here functions as both structure and ecosystem. In ancient China, walls along riverbanks regulated floods and directed irrigation. Earthen levees reinforced with compacted soil protected settlements and farmland. These hydraulic walls exemplify human adaptation to dynamic environments. Their maintenance required continuous observation. Sediment accumulation, erosion, and vegetation growth dictated repair schedules. A wall was not static, it was a negotiated boundary between human habitation and the unpredictable flow of water. Similarly, Japanese garden walls interact with climate, wind, and sunlight. Low earthen or bamboo walls shape microclimates, sheltering delicate plants while defining visual perspective. Their permeability allows airflow and seasonal variation, integrating enclosure with ecological balance. The wall becomes an instrument of temporal awareness. It changes with rain, snow, and sun, marking the passage of seasons as effectively as the shifting shadows within. Walls also mediate geological forces. Retaining walls in mountainous regions prevent landslides, redirect avalanches, and stabilize roads. Ancient examples in the Himalayas and Andes show precise stone placement to interlock irregular boulders, dissipating kinetic energy. Modern equivalents use reinforced concrete, geotextiles, and engineered backfill. Regardless of technology, the principle remains. Walls absorb, redirect, and resist natural energy, protecting human space while acknowledging environmental reality. Even in arid regions, walls regulate thermal conditions. Adobe and rammed earth absorb heat during the day and release it at night, stabilizing indoor temperature. They provide insulation against extremes without mechanical systems. In desert towns of North Africa and the Middle East, thick mud brick walls define streets, narrow alleys, and courtyards to create wind channels and shade. The wall transforms climatic adversity into comfort, demonstrating an intimate understanding of solar orientation, wind, and humidity. Coastal walls show another form of environmental negotiation. Seawalls protect settlements from tidal surges and erosion. Ancient examples in Japan and the Mediterranean relied on layered stone and rubble to absorb wave impact. Modern seawalls incorporate reinforced concrete, step terraces, and breakwaters. These structures reveal a critical duality. Walls both defend against and integrate with dynamic natural forces. Their design requires knowledge of wave mechanics, material resistance, and sediment transport. Walls influence ecological succession as well. Dry stone boundaries in Europe and Asia create microhabitats, offering niches for moss, lichen, insects, and small animals. Over centuries, these walls become living corridors. Their role extends beyond human use. They participate in the life cycles of multiple species. In this sense, walls are simultaneously artificial and ecological, shaping landscapes as much as enclosing them. The interaction of walls with the natural world also informs modern architecture. Green walls, vertical gardens, and living facades filter air, reduce heat, and manage stormwater. Vegetation becomes part of structural design, blurring the distinction between natural and built systems. Here, the wall functions as ecosystem, climate control, and aesthetic object simultaneously. Even the Great Wall of China demonstrates environmental integration. Its alignment follows mountain ridges and river valleys, adapting to topography rather than imposing a straight line. Watchtowers perch atop natural elevations, combining human engineering with geographic advantage. The wall's survival depends on the very terrain it negotiates. Its endurance is a testament to a subtle understanding. The environment is not merely an obstacle, but an integral participant in construction. Throughout history, walls have mediated the boundary between human activity and natural forces. They contain, resist, channel, and harmonize. Every choice of material, placement, and orientation reflects observation, calculation, and adaptation. Whether preventing erosion, flooding, or thermal extremes, walls represent humanity's ongoing dialogue with the earth. They are as much about collaboration with nature as they are about control, transforming environmental challenge into structural opportunity. Walls have never been purely physical. They are also social instruments. Throughout history, walls have delineated identity, status, and belonging. They define neighborhoods, separate classes, and mark ethnic or political boundaries. In doing so, walls create invisible forces as powerful as the stone and mortar they are made from. The human experience of space is shaped as much by these divisions as by climate or gravity. In medieval Europe, city walls enclosed economic and social hierarchies. Wealthier districts often occupied higher ground or more secure quarters, while lower class or artisan neighbourhoods clustered near gates or less defended sectors. The wall amplified pre-existing inequalities, offering protection and prestige to some while exposing others. Its presence mediated access to trade, justice, and security, institutionalizing social stratification in brick and stone. In Asia, walls within cities delineated caste and administrative divisions. In traditional Chinese capitals, concentric walls separated the imperial court from government officials and ordinary citizens. Each layer required permission for passage, reinforcing hierarchy through spatial control. Within towns, walls separated family compounds, temples, and markets, balancing inclusion and exclusion. Walls were simultaneously defensive, administrative, and symbolic, a physical articulation of social order. In the Middle East, walled districts reinforced religious and communal identities. Cities such as Jerusalem and Cairo contained multiple layers of enclosure, each corresponding to faith, profession, or lineage. Within these precincts, daily routines, trade, and worship were regulated by access points, gates, and neighbourhood walls. The boundaries were both practical and psychological. Residents internalized divisions, navigating their social world through the architecture that contained it. Colonial periods expanded these principles. European powers often walled off administrative or European districts in colonial cities, segregating them from local populations. Walls enforced racial, economic, and political hierarchies. Streets and housing patterns reflected imperial priorities, and control of access became a central tool of governance. Gates, checkpoints, and customs houses maintained separation, transforming urban space into a visual and experiential representation of authority. In the modern era, walls continue to structure social life. Gated communities, apartment complexes, and institutional campuses rely on physical barriers to create exclusivity and privacy. Even when purely symbolic, walls signal status and control. Public perception of enclosure reinforces patterns of interaction, shaping movement, behaviour, and identity. The wall persists as a social instrument as much as an architectural element. Walls also influence cultural memory. In cities, the remnants of old fortifications preserve historical narratives, marking the edges of former power. In Europe, Many medieval walls remain as tourist attractions, embedding collective identity in masonry. Similarly, city walls in China, the Middle East, and Latin America carry both historical and cultural resonance, connecting present inhabitants to past events and structures. A wall becomes a mnemonic device as well as a barrier. In times of conflict, social walls take on heightened significance. Berlin during the Cold War demonstrates the psychological power of division. The Berlin Wall separated communities, families, and entire cultural spheres. Its function went beyond the physical. It imposed identity, allegiance, and limitation. Escape attempts and crossings transformed the wall into a site of struggle and symbolism. Even after its fall, the wall remains a historical marker, illustrating how boundaries shape both reality and perception. Religious and ethnic divisions are often expressed through walls. In cities with contested identities, neighbourhoods may be physically or visually segregated to reduce friction. In Belfast, Northern Ireland, peace walls separate Protestant and Catholic communities. In Israel and Palestine, barriers similarly partition populations. These contemporary examples reveal continuity with the past. Walls are tools of separation, asserting control over movement and defining social belonging. At smaller scales, walls shape domestic social life. In homes, partitions create privacy, define roles, and regulate interaction. Shared living spaces rely on walls to mediate noise, light, and activity. Cultural norms inform the use of space, and walls reinforce them. Open-plan living challenges this, yet even in flexible layouts, temporary partitions replicate the function of traditional walls. Social behaviour continues to respond to spatial demarcation. In all cases, the wall embodies authority and delineation. It can protect or isolate, empower or exclude. Its significance extends beyond material properties to symbolic, psychological, and social dimensions. Human experience is structured as much by walls as by law, language, or a ritual. Understanding walls is therefore inseparable from understanding the societies that build them. They are instruments of power, memory, and identity, simultaneously physical and conceptual boundaries. Walls have long stood as both instruments and witnesses of conflict. Their construction often reflects tension, whether between states, communities, or ideologies. Beyond physical defense, walls impose psychological boundaries, shaping perception, behavior, and identity. In this sense, the wall is as much a tool of memory as of protection, encoding history into stone, brick, or earth. One of the most emblematic examples is the Berlin Wall. Erected in 1961, it divided East and West Berlin for nearly 3 decades. More than a barrier to movement, it became a symbol of political and ideological separation. Families, neighbourhoods, and social networks were physically and emotionally split. Watchtowers, barbed wire, and fortified gates reinforced the sense of permanence. Yet its very presence created a daily tension between containment and escape. The wall transformed city life, structuring routines, routes, and perceptions of space. When it fell in 1989, it left not only physical ruins, but a deep cultural memory. In the Middle East, barriers between communities serve similar functions. Walls separating Israeli and Palestinian territories delineate control and access, yet they also create psychological landscapes. Graffiti, murals, and other markings turn the wall into a medium of expression, transforming it into an archive of human emotion. Even in their functional role, walls acquire cultural significance, reflecting both the conflict that produced them and the resilience of those living alongside them. Borders in history have often relied on massive fortifications. Hadrian's Wall in Britain, built by the Romans, not only protected the northern frontier, but also projected imperial presence. The Great Wall of China served a similar function on a continental scale. In both cases, walls became markers of identity. Inside was civilization. Outside was perceived danger or chaos. These boundaries were less about immediate defense than the assertion of territorial and cultural order. Over centuries, they have entered collective memory as symbols of human ambition and endurance. The materiality of walls often amplifies their symbolic weight. Thick masonry, earthen embankments, and fortified gates communicate permanence. In contrast, ephemeral barriers such as sandbags or temporary partitions reflect urgent necessity rather than enduring authority. The distinction affects how societies perceive and interact with walls. Permanent walls evoke reflection and awe. Temporary walls generate anxiety and alertness. Their physical characteristics influence their cultural impact. Walls in conflict zones frequently accumulate layers of history. Each addition, repair, or modification records a moment of tension. Archaeologists and historians can read these layers like pages of a book, understanding the sequence of siege, occupation, or negotiation. In this way, walls act as archives, preserving the memory of human struggle in material form. Even collapsed or partially destroyed walls tell a story. Absence is part of narrative as presence. The psychological impact of walls is significant. They alter movement, behavior, and social relations. Checkpoints, gates, and watchtowers condition daily routines, while barriers create visual and auditory isolation. Individuals living near fortified walls experience altered spatial perception, often internalizing the sense of confinement or surveillance. Walls thus extend influence beyond the physical, shaping experience, expectation, and interaction. Walls also memorialize past conflicts. The remains of medieval city walls in Europe, battle lines preserved in earthworks, and remnants of the Berlin Wall serve as tangible reminders of human struggle. They function as instruments of collective memory, prompting reflection on governance, identity, and violence. Their preservation allows societies to confront historical tensions while interpreting contemporary boundaries. In literature and art, walls operate metaphorically as well. They represent psychological barriers, social divisions, and existential constraints. From classical texts describing walled cities to modern depictions of divided communities, walls symbolize both protection and limitation. Art transforms the physical boundary into a narrative device, encoding human conflict into visual and linguistic form. Even walls not associated with direct conflict carry echoes of struggle. Domestic, religious, or administrative walls negotiate tensions between public and private, sacred and secular. Inclusion and exclusion, their design and placement encode priorities and values. In this sense, all walls participate in a subtle form of conflict, mediating opposing forces, safety versus accessibility, community versus individuality, permanence versus impermanence. The duality of walls, protective and divisive, functional and symbolic, illustrates their central role in human experience. They structure space, regulate behavior, and embed memory in material form. Across eras and cultures, walls reflect both the conflicts that necessitate them and the societies that interpret their presence. To study walls of conflict is to study the layered interactions of power, perception, and history made manifest in stone and earth. Walls have always carried meaning beyond function. Their surfaces invite decoration, narrative, and interpretation. From murals and frescoes to graffiti and relief sculpture, walls serve as canvases for human expression. The wall transforms from mere boundary into medium. reflecting culture, ideology, and aesthetics. In doing so, it communicates messages across time, space, and social context. In ancient civilizations, walls were integral to visual storytelling. Egyptian temples, tombs, and palaces were covered with painted reliefs depicting gods, kings, and daily life. These images were not mere decoration. They encoded religious belief, social hierarchy, and historical record. The walls of tombs in the Valley of the Kings illustrate rituals, agriculture, and conquest with precise visual language. Each stroke, pigment, and carving reinforce collective understanding, turning solid masonry into a narrative medium. Similarly, in Mesopotamia, walls recorded both myth and administration. Palace reliefs at Persepolis display processions, tribute, and ceremonial life. The visual sequences communicate power, legitimacy, and cosmological order. In these contexts, the wall serves dual purposes, structural and mnemonic. Its permanence guarantees the endurance of the story it carries. The boundary becomes an archive, resistant to both time and human interference. In the classical world, Greek and Roman walls blended utility with aesthetics. Roman villas were adorned with frescoes depicting landscapes, mythology, and architectural vistas. These paintings enhanced interior space, visually extending walls beyond their physical limits. Roman city walls, too, bore inscriptions and sculptural reliefs to convey civic identity. Here, the wall is simultaneously container and communicator. It holds and presents, delineates and informs. During the Middle Ages, European walls continued this synthesis of structure and narrative. Gothic cathedrals employed stained glass, sculptural reliefs, and frescoes to instruct and inspire. Walls organized religious storytelling in hierarchical sequences, guiding perception from nave to sanctuary. The physical architecture was inseparable from its visual program. Flying buttresses, vaults, and niches became integral to both support and display. The wall's role expanded to mediate spiritual experience, merging structural necessity with cultural expression. In Asia, walls were similarly expressive. Chinese temple walls and palace screens used painted and carved surfaces to communicate power, virtue, and cosmology. Japanese shoji and fusuma panels allowed artistic imagery to transform interior space, conveying seasonal changes, narrative scenes, and philosophical ideas. The wall becomes mutable, a surface that mediates perception while maintaining function. Its artistic expression does not compromise utility, but enhances experience. Graffiti and public murals demonstrate the wall's social role in contemporary culture. Urban walls function as platforms for commentary, dissent, and identity. From politically charged murals to street art reflecting neighborhood character, walls become tools for public engagement. They democratize space, turning boundaries into active participants in social dialogue. In this sense, the wall's expressive potential continues to evolve, responding to technological, cultural, and social shifts. Walls also shape perception through texture, form, and light. Reliefs, carvings, and applied surfaces modify shadow, rhythm, and scale. Romanesque patterns, Islamic geometric designs, and contemporary bas-reliefs demonstrate how subtle variations in surface articulate space, influence movement, and suggest hierarchy. Walls communicate even when silent, guiding interaction with the built environment. In a modern architecture, walls frequently blur the boundary between structural necessity and artistic statement. Brutalist concrete facades, folded metal panels, and glass curtain walls use form, material, and texture to create expressive impact. Architects manipulate scale, repetition, and rhythm to convey meaning, integrate context, and evoke response. A wall becomes experiential, a surface to touch, view, and inhabit simultaneously. Murals and wall-based art also function as cultural memory. They record social movements, commemorate events, and encode communal identity. Diego Rivera's frescoes in Mexico, the murals of Northern Ireland, and contemporary memorial walls demonstrate how the wall as medium preserves history and sentiment. In this capacity, walls bridge temporal divides, allowing successive generations to engage with past narratives. Ultimately, walls are simultaneously physical, social, and cultural. They contain, protect, and define space while inviting interpretation, communication, and reflection. Across time, they have evolved from simple enclosures to active participants in human expression. The wall is structure and story, boundary and canvas, a medium through which humanity projects its history, belief, and creativity onto the very material that shapes its world. The construction of walls has always advanced in tandem with technology. Each era brought new materials, tools, and methods that transformed what walls could do and how they performed. From mud and stone to steel, reinforced concrete and modern composites, technological innovation has expanded the possibilities of enclosure, structure, and function. Early civilizations relied on locally available materials. Mud brick, adobe, timber, and stone were shaped with simple tools, pressed or stacked to form enclosures. Knowledge was empirical. Repeated practice revealed which materials resisted weathering, compression, and erosion. Ancient Mesopotamian walls, for example, utilized sun-dried clay bricks for city fortifications. Their thickness and layering absorbed impact, while plaster coatings provided protection from water. Builders refined techniques over generations, developing solutions tailored to climate and available resources. Stone technology advanced rapidly in Egypt, Greece, and Rome. Quarrying, cutting, and lifting techniques enabled the construction of larger, heavier, and more precise walls. Masonry innovations, such as ashlar cutting and interlocking blocks, increased stability and durability. Mortar allowed flexibility in assembly and better load distribution. Roman concrete, with its hydraulic properties, revolutionized walls by allowing curved surfaces, vaults, and domes. Structures like the Pantheon demonstrate the integration of material, form, and engineering in unprecedented ways. Timber walls also evolved in sophistication. Post and beam frameworks, wattle and daub infill, and interlocking joinery systems provided both structural integrity and flexibility. Timber allowed rapid construction, adaptation, and repair. In Japan, traditional wooden walls were designed to flex under seismic activity, reducing damage from earthquakes. Technology was embedded in both material selection and structural logic, reflecting careful observation of natural forces. The Industrial Revolution accelerated wall technology. Mass production of brick, iron, and steel enabled standardized construction on large scales. Load-bearing walls gave way to skeletal frameworks, while curtain walls allowed enclosure without structural dependence. The steel frame, coupled with plate glass, produced high-rise buildings and open interiors previously impossible with masonry alone. Factories, office buildings, and warehouses benefited from speed, uniformity, and strength, reshaping urban environments. Concrete reinforced with steel emerged as a defining innovation of the 20th century. Reinforced concrete walls resist both compression and tension, allowing cantilevered structures, long spans, and thin facades. Engineers could now realize ambitious architectural forms, curved, folded, or perforated walls that simultaneously supported weight and defined space. Precast panels and modular elements increased efficiency, transforming walls into components of large-scale industrial construction. Modern materials extend beyond traditional composites. High-performance glass, fibre-reinforced polymers, insulated panels, and adaptive facades expand both function and design. Walls now regulate temperature, light, sound, and energy. Smart walls integrate sensors to monitor structural health, adjust shading, or generate electricity. Material science transforms walls into active participants in building performance, merging engineering, ecology, and technology. Construction methods have evolved in parallel with materials. Early walls were built manually, layer by layer, while mechanized equipment now moves massive blocks, mixes concrete, and assembles prefabricated panels. Robotics, 3D printing, and digital modeling enable precise fabrication and complex geometries. Structural analysis software predicts stress, vibration, and load distribution, allowing optimization before a single brick is laid. The wall has become both object and system. Walls also adapt to environmental challenges through technological innovation. Thermal insulation, vapor barriers, and airtight construction reduce energy use. Seismic design principles, reinforced cores, and damping systems protect against earthquakes and vibration. Acoustic layers control noise in urban or industrial contexts. Modern walls balance multiple demands simultaneously, demonstrating the integration of science and construction. In military and security contexts, technological evolution transformed fortifications. Artillery-resistant bastions, reinforced concrete bunkers, and anti-blast panels replaced traditional masonry. Barriers evolved from simple mass to complex systems incorporating sensors, surveillance, and layered defense. The logic of walls remained the same: contain, protect, control, but technology amplified effectiveness while reducing reliance on sheer mass. Throughout history, technological advances in materials, design, and construction methods have expanded what walls can accomplish. From simple enclosures to complex responsive systems, walls now mediate environmental, social, and structural demands with unprecedented precision. Yet even with innovation, the fundamental principles remain: balance, stability, and careful integration with context. Technology enhances the wall's capacity, but its purpose, protection, enclosure, and delineation remains unchanged. In the 21st century, walls increasingly exist in both physical and virtual forms. Digital technology has expanded the concept of boundaries, creating networks, firewalls, and security perimeters that function like traditional masonry but in cyberspace. The principles remain consistent: containment, protection, and controlled access. What changes is medium, scale, and interaction. Physical walls in contemporary architecture continue to evolve in response to digital needs. Data centers, server farms, and laboratories rely on walls engineered for temperature control, electromagnetic shielding, and access management. Reinforced concrete, specialized coatings, and modular panels create secure environments optimized for technology rather than human habitation. These walls are extensions of digital infrastructure, mediating the intersection of human activity and electronic systems. The metaphor of the wall has expanded into cybersecurity. Firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and encrypted gateways replicate the logic of enclosure, monitoring ingress and egress while preserving internal integrity. In these cases, the wall is informational rather than material, yet it performs analogous functions. It defines boundaries, enforces rules, and protects against intrusion. Just as a city wall regulates movement, a firewall regulates data flow. Smart buildings illustrate the integration of physical and digital walls. Sensor networks embedded in walls monitor structural health, air quality, and occupancy. Adaptive facades change opacity, ventilation, or insulation in response to real-time conditions. Walls become interfaces, responding dynamically to environment and human use. The boundary between interior and exterior is now programmable, transforming walls from static barriers to active systems. Urban planning also benefits from digital modelling. Virtual walls simulate boundaries, zoning, and circulation before physical construction begins. Computer-aided design allows architects to visualize airflow, light penetration, and structural performance, refining wall placement for efficiency and comfort. Augmented reality enables dynamic interaction with walls during construction and maintenance, reducing error and optimizing performance. In domestic spaces, walls incorporate connectivity. Smart panels integrate controls for lighting, sound, temperature, and communication. Partition walls may include embedded displays, interactive surfaces, or energy generation systems. Here, the wall mediates daily life not only physically but digitally, offering interfaces between human activity and technological management. Boundaries now carry information as well as mass. Digital tools also enable preservation and documentation. 3D scanning, photogrammetry, and simulation record historical walls for study, restoration, and education. Virtual reconstructions allow researchers and the public to experience structures that are partially destroyed or inaccessible. Walls, once permanent, now have a digital counterpart that preserves form, texture, and context indefinitely. Security and privacy in the digital age parallel historical concerns with enclosure. Just as city walls separated populations or protected assets, firewalls and virtual perimeters manage access, guard data, and create zones of control. Identity, permission, and surveillance are central concerns. The metaphor of the wall remains effective precisely because it encodes human understanding of space, protection, and exclusion. Even contemporary art engages the wall as both physical and digital object. Projections, interactive installations, and augmented reality overlay traditional surfaces, turning walls into hybrid canvases. The physical boundary serves as substrate, while digital layers provide narrative, visualization, and engagement. Walls now communicate in multiple dimensions, reflecting both material presence and technological augmentation. The convergence of physical and digital walls demonstrates continuity with historical principles. Whether in mud, stone, concrete, or code, walls define limits, regulate access, and mediate interaction. Technology amplifies capacity and adaptability, but the essential function remains to structure space, experience, and interaction. Walls, in all forms, continue to organize human life and interpret the environment, both tangible and virtual. In the digital era, walls are simultaneously more pervasive and more flexible. They encompass information flows, human movement, environmental control, and social boundaries. They serve as protective envelopes, organizational tools, and platforms for expression. Across all scales and media, the wall continues its enduring role, structuring space, mediating experience, and defining human presence in the world. Looking forward, walls are evolving into integrated systems that combine architecture, ecology, and technology. Their traditional role of enclosure and protection is now augmented by functions that respond dynamically to environment, society, and infrastructure. The future wall is not merely a barrier, it is a mediator, a monitor, and a participant in the spaces it defines. Sustainability drives many contemporary innovations. Green walls, living facades, and bio-integrated structures reduce energy use, filter air, and manage water runoff. vertical gardens transform surfaces into active ecological participants. Walls absorb carbon, support biodiversity, and regulate microclimates. In urban areas, they function as both environmental tools and aesthetic enhancements, demonstrating that enclosure and ecological stewardship can coexist. Adaptive materials expand the possibilities of walls further. Phase change panels store and release heat. Self-healing concretes repair microcracks, and smart coatings adjust reflectivity or transparency based on light or temperature. Sensors embedded within walls monitor structural stress, humidity, and occupancy, enabling predictive maintenance. The wall becomes a responsive system, interacting with its surroundings rather than passively resisting them. Urban planning incorporates walls as dynamic organizers. Modular partitions, retractable barriers, and flexible facades allow spaces to change function with time or need. Streets, plazas, and public areas can be reshaped quickly for events, transportation, or emergency response. The wall is no longer fixed. It is a tool of temporal spatial management. Digital integration further transforms walls. Augmented and virtual reality overlay surfaces with information, visualizations, and interactive interfaces. In offices, museums, and homes, walls communicate, guide, and engage. Security systems, environmental controls, and smart home technologies embed functionality directly into the wall. Physical and virtual boundaries converge, creating hybrid spaces that are simultaneously protective, informative, and interactive. Walls also reflect social values and ethical considerations. Inclusive design emphasizes accessibility, transparency, and connection. Walls that once divided communities are reimagined as connectors, partitions that maintain privacy while enabling communication. Historical fortifications and barriers inspire reinterpretation in modern urban spaces, combining cultural memory with contemporary utility. In the realm of extreme environments, walls are essential for habitation beyond Earth. Concepts for lunar or Martian habitats rely on walls made from local regolith or advanced composites to protect against radiation, pressure differences, and temperature extremes. Here, the wall is both life support and structural boundary, demonstrating the enduring importance of enclosure in human survival. Materials science continues to redefine structural capacity. Carbon fiber, graphene composites, and high-performance alloys create walls that are lighter, stronger, and more resilient. They allow unprecedented spans, thinner profiles, and multifunctional capabilities. Walls integrate energy generation, thermal management, and load-bearing functions, merging multiple demands into a single element. Culturally, walls retain symbolic importance. They mark identity, heritage, and history. Even as technology transforms construction, the wall remains a medium of memory and narrative. Preservation, adaptive reuse, and reinterpretation of historical walls maintain continuity with the past while addressing contemporary needs. They remind society that boundaries are not only practical, but meaningful. The future wall embodies integration. Material science, environmental stewardship, digital augmentation, and social awareness converge. It functions as enclosure, mediator, interface, and participant, from ancient mud brick barriers to smart facades and extraterrestrial habitats. Walls demonstrate continuity in principle, evolution in technique, and expansion in purpose. In every era, walls have reflected human understanding of force, environment, and society. They protect, define, and communicate. They structure the spaces in which people live, work, and interact. As technology and knowledge advance, walls will continue to adapt, preserving their essential role while expanding their capacity to respond to changing human and environmental demands. The wall remains, at once ancient and futuristic, a marker of civilization, a tool of organization, and a bridge between human ambition and the world it inhabits.